Good afternoon. I'm Robert Pondiscio. I'm a senior fellow here at the American Enterprise Institute. And thanks for joining us today for this discussion on the topic, do we make teaching too hard for mere mortals? Earlier this summer, I was honored to be invited to testify before the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee at a hearing on teacher pay and retention. The purpose of that hearing was a proposal to set a national minimum salary for teachers, which ostensibly is what many believe is what it takes to improve teacher retention and end teacher shortages. My testimony took a slightly different tack. By all means, raise pay. But that's not going to keep good teachers in the classroom, in my opinion. A recent Pew Research Center survey found that 84% of teachers in America feel there's just not enough time in the day to get all their work done. 2/3 of teachers, 68%, describe their jobs as overwhelming. The factors that contribute to teachers' sense that they're drowning include, but are not limited to, in my opinion, poor teacher preparation, deteriorating classroom conditions, specifically classroom disorder and behavior, shoddy curriculum, and increasingly the expectation that teachers will not just teach reading, math, or their subject areas effectively, but play almost a quasi-therapeutic role in response to students' behavioral and mental health needs, which of course are legitimate. To say it bluntly, we're asking teachers to do too many things to do any of them well at any salary. In my testimony before the Senate, I cited something said by one of our guests today, Cade Brumley, the Louisiana State Superintendent of Education. He said in an interview with the Independent Women's Forum, and I'm going to quote him here, "Students who are habitually ungovernable should be removed from teachers' classrooms so teachers can actually teach and students can actually learn." What I didn't know at the time was the context for Brumley's remark, a report authored by several dozen Louisiana teachers featuring 18 common sense recommendations for fixing professional development, changing approaches to student behavior and discipline, improving curriculum and instruction, and taking non-academic responsibilities off of teachers' plates. That report was titled simply and winningly, "Let Teachers Teach." And when I read it, I knew it had to be the topic of our next AEI webinar on teaching and learning. The recommendations, not from state bureaucrats, but from teachers themselves, include abolishing antiquated lesson planning requirements, limiting cell phone use in school, and either paying teachers for non-academic work or putting an end to it altogether. You know, I'm often struck by how differently education policymakers and practitioners talk about teaching. It's as if they're talking about two different professions. Louisiana's Let Teachers Teach, commissioned by the state, authored by teachers, is an opportunity, I think, to bridge that divide and talk about what's really happening in classrooms and how to create the conditions that keep good teachers in the classroom and improve outcomes for students. So let's get started on this discussion. Let me introduce our guest today. Regena Beard has been a teacher for over 20 years. She's spent a decade in Louisiana's Zachary Community School District. She's a 6th grade robotics and STEM teacher, as well as a 5th grade science teacher, and a member of the Louisiana Teacher Advisory Council. Regena was one of 24 educators named to the Let Teachers Teach workgroup, in which she was tasked with identifying issues and solutions for the Department of Education's recommendations. Dr. Cade Brumley was appointed Louisiana State Superintendent in May 2020 at the height of the global pandemic. Under his leadership, Louisiana has accelerated academic outcomes for students and expanded educational freedom. Prior to joining the Louisiana Department of Education, Dr. Brumley served as superintendent of Jefferson Parish Schools, the largest school system in the state of Louisiana with more than 51,000 students. Dr. Brumley also served as the DeSoto Parish School Superintendent for 6 years. And Michael Sonbert is a best-selling author, speaker, performance coach, educator, endurance athlete, autism dad, and the founder and CEO of Skyrocket Education and Rebel Culture. Michael has dedicated the past 20 years of his career to coaching, partnering with, and researching leaders from public schools to Fortune 500 companies. Partners include hundreds of K-12 charter, district, and faith-based schools, and companies like Google, Northwell Health Systems, Oakley, Hormel Foods, and Paul Mitchell Schools. He's committed to helping business leaders grow thriving, impactful, purposeful organizations. His leadership philosophies are currently being taught in a graduate course at the University of Notre Dame's leadership program. So to start the conversation off, and let's go through some of these recommendations. I'm going to start with Dr. Brumley. Cade, talk us through the Louisiana recommendations. And also critically, talk about the impetus for them. What inspired you to take up this work? And if you'd be so kind as to walk us through maybe not all of the recommendations, but maybe the top handful that you think are most salient and important.
Well, Robert, let me start off by thanking you and AEI for putting on this conversation today. I think it's an important topic, not just in Louisiana, but across the country that for which we should be engaged. I consistently share with our public here that teaching is a noble profession. And I say I'm a bit biased, but potentially the most noble of professions. And I always tend to use the word profession and professional because I believe teaching is a profession and teachers should act as professionals and they should be treated as professionals. So it's a two-way street. But as I've traveled the state over the last few years, I often hear from teachers some of the frustrations that they have. Obviously, every teacher wants to be paid fairly, but beyond pay, Robert, teachers want to be working for acceptable leaders. Teachers want to have their voices heard. Teachers want to have environments where they're free to teach without distraction, and students are free to learn. And so what I decided to do is to call together a group of about 30 educators from across the state. And I shared with them that we would undergo an exercise to identify some of the challenges facing teachers in classrooms across the state. And I charged them with actual policy recommendations that we could put into place. And I was very clear that this would not be a check the box exercise. It would not be an exercise for which we were just seeking to put out a press release, but I wanted real policy recommendations that I could take forward either to our state legislature, to our state board of education, to local governing boards, system or school leaders to improve and elevate the teaching profession. And so at the end of the day, through working with that talented group, and I'm thankful that we have Regena Beard on the call today, who's a member of that group, we were able to outline 18 recommendations to improve the teaching profession so that we'll hopefully be able to recruit and retain more educators into this work. We're really excited about these recommendations and seek to move them to implementation. But Robert, what I've done here on this particular slide that I hope everyone can see is I just listed a top 10. So again, we have 18 recommendations, but just on this slide, I kind of called this my top 10. Very simply, one, ample time for classroom preparation. Teachers typically begin their school year before students. Teachers are typically back in the building, so to speak, before students, but oftentimes their days are so structured that they don't have any time to simply be alone in preparation for the students coming into the classroom. And so that first recommendation simply was give teachers time in their classrooms to prepare before students come back. I shared these recommendations with a group of about 7,000 educators for the first time roughly 2 months ago. I shared this first recommendation and the room broke into applause. And imagine that, Robert, just such a simple thing of telling and asking systems allow teachers some time in their classrooms just to prepare their classroom before students come back. That's one. The next is our legislature, under good intentions over years, created a number of different trainings that teachers would have to participate in and complete annually. And over time, I think our policymakers and certainly teachers came to agree that these trainings had grown too excessive. And so the idea there was to shift these trainings to a cycle. We wanted to decouple this idea that student behavior referrals and the quantity of those referrals should in any way impact a school's accountability score or a school's letter grade that's provided to the public. We also shared this concept that we need to trust our teachers, not blame our teachers. If a teacher is having a complication with a student who is habitually misbehaving in a classroom, that student should be removed from that classroom if that's the request of that teacher. And if that happens a number of times, then before that student is allowed back in that teacher's classroom, a parent or guardian should come to the school to have a conference with school leadership and that teacher around those behavioral expectations. Because, one student or a few students should not be able to disrupt a teacher or other students from learning. Next was placing ungovernable students at alternative sites for behavior support. Ungovernable is a term in Louisiana law. It's not one I simply made up for this activity. These are students, a very small amount of students that are in schools that are ungovernable. That they find it difficult to meet those expectations day in and day out. And we're recommending here that those students be placed at alternative sites where they could get the behavioral, mental health, maybe academic support that they need to return to that regular education classroom. Next, limit cell phone use. So this was probably the number one item that I heard, Robert, from the teachers on the work group, is limiting this cell phone use of students in classrooms. Another is paying teachers for work after hours that's not academic. Certainly, we understand that teachers have to grade papers. They have to plan. They have to have conversations with parents about students. But some things that they do, they should be compensated for. Maybe working a ball game is an example of that, where they have to come up and spend their entire Friday night working without any compensation. Another idea is we certainly appreciate and understand that some students have mental health challenges, but we need to stop forcing teachers to be mental health therapists. Teachers are not trained for that. So it's a disservice both to the teacher and to the student. We need to eliminate the mandate that teachers have come to believe as a perception that they have to read from a script in terms of their curriculum. And finally, on this top 10 list is just this idea of abolishing antiquated lesson plans. The state of Louisiana over some time has done a really good job of introducing high quality instructional materials for schools, and it's used in classrooms. And frankly, that HQIM has lesson plans included. And so our view is that teachers should be able to take those lesson plans that are part of the HQIM, annotate those plans, and put them into action. They shouldn't spend all weekend writing lesson plans, actually spending more time writing a plan than teaching students. So, Robert, that's a look at our top 10. That's the reason for which we're here. And now we're just moving towards implementation.
Fantastic. Thank you. Before we move on, I'm just curious, Cade, is this concept of letting teachers teach, of simplifying the profession, is this an idea that you walked in the door with 3 or 4 years ago, or did this kind of evolve as you sit in the seat you're in now?
No, I mean, I am a teacher, Robert. So I am an educator at heart. But I would say just over time, some of the themes continue to emerge. Some of the frustrations continue to emerge around these items that we discussed. And I just said, look, we have an opportunity to do something here. We have a brand new governor in the state of Louisiana that's committed to ed reform. We have a new state legislature. We have a new state board of education. And I think we have a lot of stars aligning here for the important work that we want to do. And it just felt like the time was right to get this done.
Great. Regina Beard, special props to you, because if I'm not mistaken, it's the first day of school in Louisiana today. So you are literally taking time away from your students for this. So we deeply appreciate it. But can you take us inside of this process a little bit? Tell us the backstory for this working group that you were a part of, what the experience was like, how you became part of this group, and what was it like working with your fellow teachers and state leaders on these recommendations?
Absolutely. Well, first off, thank you for having me today. I appreciate it. I am a member of Dr. Brumley's Teacher Advisory Council, which he started in September of 2022. It is comprised of teachers from all over the state, every content area. We represent all parts of everyone. And so we meet quarterly. And one thing that Dr. Brumley has done that I just appreciate is he just sits with us and says, what's going on, and truly listens. And so through those meetings and through him visiting other schools, the work group was formed. It is led by our 2024 State Teacher of the Year, Kylie Altier. She did a fabulous job working at that work group. I became a part of the work group simply because I was on the Teacher Advisory Council, but teachers from all over the state could have applied to be on the work group as well. And that, again, also represents all areas of the state, all content, all grade levels. So it wasn't just an isolated area. That way we got a better picture of what was going on throughout our state. So in March, I was selected to be on the work group, and we began our meetings in the spring. We met 4 times in the spring, and we discussed topics centered around curriculum and instruction, student behavior, and things that just take teachers time. Our members were asked to just kind of share what are some ways, some things that can be done to help improve the teaching experience in areas of those topics. And Dr. Brumley stated earlier, he was very specific about our recommendations need to be actionable. You know, we have a short amount of time, and we're not here to just share our grievances. We're here to make a change. And so we were able to share within the topic, these are some things that were going on, and come up with a cohesive idea of a recommendation to help alleviate what was going on in the classroom. Our legislators were wonderful. Many of them were willing to jump right in and help us get started on these recommendations. So we really appreciate the support of them. It's been a great experience. It was an honor to work alongside with our Department of Education, our government leaders, other teachers. You know, it's funny because when people read these recommendations, they say, well, yeah, I've been saying that for years. And so it's just wonderful to have that support system that hears us and is willing to do something about it. And so I'm just so proud to be a part of the process when Louisiana is truly leading the way.
Great. That actually is a perfect lead into something else I wanted to ask Cade Brumley. You alluded up top to getting basically a standing ovation from teachers when you unveiled these recommendations. As Regina Beard suggests, no surprise there. A lot of us, and I'm a former classroom teacher myself, a lot of us have been talking about some of these things for a very long time. That said, the issues that students face, that teachers and schools need to deal with don't go away. So if you're taking them off the teacher's plate, they got to go somewhere. So I'm just going to guess here that maybe there's been a little bit of, if not friction, then at least some pushback from whether it's school boards, administrators, or others, right? In other words, this work has to be reapportioned and someone's ox gets gored, right?
Well, yes, but let me first begin by thanking Regina publicly on the call for her service, not only to the Let Teachers Teach work group, but for our advisory council work as well. She's been a real star there. So thank you, Regina, publicly in front of a national audience. Yeah, Robert. I mean, look, I mean, we're asking for things such as if a teacher is going to be working after hours, that they have to be compensated for that work. And so certainly that does impact a school system or a school system's budget as they're having to consider ways in which they need to finance activities that they previously had simply had the teacher to participate. So I would say that probably is the most prevalent example of pushback from school systems. We do get some level or we have received some level of pushback around the firm stances that we've taken around student discipline and student behavior to make sure that is being handled appropriately. But look, Robert, on that particular issue, I just believe that schools, both the campus as a whole and the classroom, need to be peaceful, and they need to be orderly, and they don't need to be chaotic. The teacher deserves the right to teach. The student deserves the right to learn. And I think that if that happens, then learning can materialize, which is the reason schools exist, and students can socialize appropriately. And we're not talking about, in fact, many students. I mean, overwhelmingly, the students in schools meet those expectations every day, add value to those campuses. We're talking about a very small grouping of students that oftentimes just need some additional support. And so if we can look at what is, kind of underpinning the issue there, maybe we can also provide them the support that they need for reentry successfully back into that classroom or campus.
There you go. Let's bring Michael Sonbert into this conversation for a bit of a national perspective. Michael, these recommendations, as we were just discussing, do seem to place significant responsibility for teacher stress on school administrators. Does that strike you as appropriate? For example, have you seen cases in which poor or ineffective leadership is chasing teachers out of the classroom?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks, Robert, for having me. And Regena, shout out to you. I was a teacher in South Philadelphia, and I know what that first day of school feels like. So you are an absolute rock star for being on the call today. Robert, I've seen poor leadership chase teachers out of the profession, but more often I see it chase them into their classrooms and almost put up these walls where they want admin out. One of Cade on Cade's slide, let's just use lesson planning as an example. And I agree, we coach people all the time that lesson planning formats need to be streamlined. We say, don't box your teachers in with boxes. Don't box them in with boxes. And many teachers are cutting and pasting stuff from the internet. They're putting stuff in as placeholders, things that they're not actually going to teach. They're doing it to satisfy a school-wide or district-wide expectation, and then diverging from it. But let's just look at the lesson planning, for example. Nobody would argue that teachers shouldn't be well prepared. First and foremost, teachers. And it's totally fair that administrators know what's happening in classrooms. It allows for feedback to be more precise and concise and actionable. The problem is teachers like me or you, Robert, or Regena, like when you submit your lesson plans, you spend all day Sunday doing this, and then the feedback is looks great, or can't wait to see it, can't wait to see this, or nothing at all. It starts to wear on teachers, and they think this isn't valuable. Nobody's actually reviewing this. And the people who are actually asking for this don't really know what's happening in my room. And if you multiply that by so much of what teachers are being asked to do, you know, they're the teachers who, you know, I'm in a school right now, you can see, and not in this school particularly, but in schools all the time, we see like teachers have papered over their windows. They've papered over the little door, like the little window in the doorway. It's this almost message of stay out. You can't help me. And we've worked with thousands of teachers. We've never met a first-year teacher ever who said, I just want admin to leave me alone and let me do my job. But we've met so many second, third, fourth, and on 10th year, 20-year teachers who were just like, leave me alone. I want to do my job. Stop asking me to sit through boring sit and get PD for 8 hours when I could be setting up my classroom. And so I don't think there's enough. I like the recommendations in this report. I don't think there's enough focus on just nationally how much poor leadership is driving teachers both out of the profession and almost, you know, back into their rooms.
Like I'm nodding my head because I'm having sort of PTSD recalling my first year teaching fifth grade in the South Bronx, and I don't want to be unkind to the leadership of my school back then, but one of the early lessons I learned as a teacher was the cavalry's not coming. To your point about teachers wanting to be left alone, sure, I could cite any number of instances where I went to administration with a particular problem, and they were either unhelpful or they referred me to colleagues who said, "Wait a minute, why did they send you to me? They didn't ever do anything to help me." So that wittingly or unwittingly, the message tends to get sent to teachers, at least in struggling schools. You need to figure this out on your own. Now, you know, again, I don't want to say that's poor leadership, but it was not helpful to me as a new teacher.
Yeah, exactly. In so many cases, teachers are left on their own to develop themselves. They have to figure it out on their own. And so then folks, and which makes it, by the way, so much harder to then give and receive feedback down the road, because teachers think, well, where were you 3 years ago? Where were you when I was drowning? I've actually figured a lot of these things out. I don't know any teachers who say that they have everything perfectly figured out, but if I'm doing something and it's okay, or it's even good, but you're telling me that something else will be better or great, but you've shown me through your actions and often through your inaction that you're not going to support me on this thing, that the training is going to be subpar, that there's going to be very little follow-up and coaching. What's my impetus to actually change? And so we get to that place of, you know, a little bit too little, too late.
Yeah. Regina, I was very struck by something you said earlier about how these panel discussions did not turn into, I can't remember the phrase you used, spleen venting or grievance session.
Right.
That said, there must be some of these recommendations that have more traction with you or more resonance than others. And I'm guessing, you know, different teachers prioritize different things. Are there some of these recommendations that stand out to you as, you know, this is exactly what I want people to know and hear?
I'm being honest with you. Every single recommendation was just a yes. You know, we didn't have any where we were really just didn't agree upon. Now, you know, Michael said earlier, every situation is different, every school is different, and it really breaks down to your administration, you know, and so I'm very fortunate to be where I am. I mean, I've taught in the same district for 21 years, and you know, I love where I'm at, and I have great support. But I can also see where if I didn't have the support that I have, if my administration was not doing some of these things on those recommendation list, then you know, I can see where it would be a nightmare. And so for me, the ones that resonate the most with me is the behavior one, the trust us, don't blame us. You know, if we get to the point where we are calling and begging for help, then that student needs to be removed. But couple with that, place that ungovernable student in a place where he's going to get, or he or she, sorry, is going to get academic and behavioral support. We as educators are not saying this is a bad child, kick him out and just let him go home and sit and do nothing. We wanted to make sure that that student is being supported both academically and behaviorally. You know, there's a root for the behavior. Students are not going to act a certain way just because. And so if we just send them home on their own, then they're not getting the support and we're not figuring out what's really going on. So I think both of those together are so important. Let's, yes, get them out of the environment so that everyone can learn. Every student has that right, and every teacher has a right to feel safe to do their job. But let's give those students the support that they need. I think those two were super important to all of us on the work group.
Okay, Cade, so in your seat, this is not the first time a Department of Education has issued forth recommendations, even good and sensible ones like let teachers teach, but now you're the guy who has to operationalize these. Can you talk about the process by the service after the sale, so to speak? How do you make these recommendations stick and change the climate and culture in Louisiana schools?
Yeah, well, before that, Robert, if it's okay, I'd like to just reference something that Michael shared with us, which I think is really profound and telling. You know, just like every profession, I assume whenever I talk to many teachers who leave the profession, really they didn't leave the profession; they left their principal. You know, they just did not find the principal to be acceptable to them for some reason. And so I really think that school systems across our state and across the country really should develop more time and attention into preparation programs for aspiring leaders of schools, and then also support mechanisms for practicing principals. I think that we've spent, rightfully so, considerable time around teacher development, but we have to build a bench of principals who are ready to step into schools and do this incredibly difficult job. The school principalship is awesome, both in the demands, but also in the opportunity. It is a really challenging job. I've done it, and I've supervised school principals, but a principal can shape the culture of a building so quickly and so directly that we have to spend time there. Which goes to your next question, Robert, which is just like how do we get to implementation? I've had conversations with a number of legislators, for instance, over the last few weeks about these recommendations, legislators who support these recommendations. And each time it oftentimes boils down to a conversation around what will implementation look like at that campus level? Will principals implement the recommendations appropriately? Will superintendents implement the recommendations appropriately? I tend to believe that education is a local enterprise at best, but so many of these recommendations require successful implementation at that system or school level. So these recommendations are coming in different layers. Some of them take the state legislature passing a law. As Regena shared, we have legislators working with us side by side that have already passed laws on a number of these issues. Our governor has signed them. So check, we were able to handle that. Some of them require state board to promulgate a specific rule that would apply across schools across the state. Some of them require system or school level changes. And so of the 18 recommendations, they're layered in different levels of government where a change has to happen. But I've been very clear that I'm using the pulpit that I have to bully these recommendations into implementation because teachers deserve these things in their classroom and students deserve these in their classrooms.
Wait, when you say bully, do you mean bully as in bully pulpit or putting your head down and pushing them through?
Both. So I have jokingly called out legislators on this. Hey, I need you to stop with the laws around forcing teachers to be mental health professionals. Mm-hmm. They're not. I know you're well intentioned with the law, but it's not being helpful. That would be an example. Talking about antiquated lesson planning processes. Having conversations with principals and saying, look, I understand that you need to know what is happening in the classroom. But if I walk into a coffee shop at 7 p.m. Sunday evening, there shouldn't be a teacher there crying about some bureaucratic lesson planning process. And so I think that we have to move these recommendations into implementation as quickly as possible.
There you go. Before we leave implementation, Regena, this is a bit of an unfair question because the school year is what, 7 hours old, right? So right. You probably don't have a lot of time to judge this. But when you speak to your colleagues at your school, not those who were part of the working group, is there anything that you can see or say about the implementation at the school level? How is this being discussed? How is this being received? Where it's going to be implemented in real classrooms in among frontline educators?
Well, I can tell you one of the ones that we are most excited about is cell phone use. And Dr. Brumley talked about that briefly. But when we brought that one up in the work group, it was a unanimous yes. It was instant. It was, something that we all have fought for. And look, I teach 5th and 6th grade, and our rule is no cell phones. But it's just nice to have it in law, like we've got that backing. And so that's one thing that at all grade levels, I think teachers are very excited about. The antiquated lesson plans, years ago when I was in college and we were practicing how to write a lesson plan. All the different things you had to put on there. And we know in reality, it is just putting pen to paper, and that's not necessarily what's going to happen in the classroom. So it's exciting to see the recommendation to where, put it in the annotated form if you have a high quality instructional material, and, trust us to do our job. Dr. Brumley said earlier, we are professionals, and, we just want to be treated that way. So, there's excitement around the recommendations. We do realize that it falls on the shoulders of our leaders and our administration. Most of them do. And so we know that they're overworked. We know I see my principal every day, just, stretched a million different directions. And so I know it's going to be a process, but it is for the better of our educators, which leads to better student outcomes.
Are you messaging this to parents, and what's the response there? I'm thinking in specific of the no cell phone recommendation. Whenever I have this conversation with teachers, I hear these two things in this order. Yeah. Man, we need to get rid of those cell phones, but the parents will never allow it.
look, I'm a parent of a 15-year-old boy, and it does, him not having his cell phone, I'm like, oh, it kind of worries me. But you know what? We were all 15 at one point. We all went to school and we were just fine. And so, and Dr. Brumley, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the law says turned off and put away. And so, you know, if they do have, if they're walking home from school, then they have it in their book sack, but during the school day, the law is turned off and put away. And so, you know, and I have heard from parents, you know, even in the fifth grade classroom, well, you know, my baby needs their phone. Nobody needs their phone. What we need in the classroom is a focused student. And even if it is turned off and put away sometimes, you know, they'll go in and dig and turn it on. And so they're super sneaky about it. But it just is such a distraction in the classroom that we are so grateful to have this one step forward.
Yeah, I don't have the data at arm's length, but I remember seeing a study not that long ago about the number of times that students check their phone and just the level of distraction that creates, which is just fatal to that divided attention is obviously just fatal to teaching and learning. So, but yeah, I feel like a lot of teachers are going to be like nodding like bobbleheads listening to this conversation.
Hey, Robert,
Thanks.
on that piece, I mean, I do think it's really important, the point that you raised around communication. Some of these are heavy hitters. They're dramatic changes in the actions of a school or a school system. And so we've really tried to be out front on this communication piece in all the various outlets across our state, as well as using our own social to promote some of these shifts, because we don't want parents to be caught off guard. We don't want students to be caught off guard because of some of these changes. So I think that with everything, communication really matters, and certainly with some of these shifts, it's important that we get out on the front lines of this, but also recognizing that local school systems are the best outlet to communicate with their families. And so we want to allow for that context as well.
So are you hearing from parent groups about these recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, I think as Regena mentioned, the cell phone prohibition was probably the one that we heard the most from parents around, because certainly parents want their kids to be safe at school. It's our top responsibility as an educator. And so a lot of effort, I would say, happened at that local level with superintendents, with legislators, talking to parents around why this was important, sharing some of the important data that's emerged around cell phone use and the distractions and the behavioral complications it can cause. And I would say our parents, and the year is just getting started, but I would say the parents in Louisiana are at a much better place with this cell phone policy probably today than they were a few months ago.
Great, good. Michael, let's go back to you. Can you talk for a few moments about the proper balance between teacher autonomy and administrative oversight? How can we make sure that teachers have the autonomy that they need while not being forced to bear unnecessary burdens?
Yeah, Robert, I think it's important when we're talking about teacher autonomy to make sure that we're talking about the same thing, because I rarely hear conversations from teachers that sound like, I have all these really innovative ideas for my lessons. I want to bring in all these outside sources. I'd love to get some speakers in here and engage in these group projects. And I have all these really fantastic ideas on how to bolster the content and increase student engagement and learning, and my administration won't go for it. Which, by the way, if that was the conversation, that would be problematic. What we more often hear, or in fact always hear, is, I just want to be left alone. Stop coming into my classroom when you don't know what I'm teaching. I feel like you asking me to share my objectives is exhibiting a lack of trust. And so I think it's important that we actually define what autonomy is. If it's the former, and administrators are so tethered to this curriculum or that, that's a huge problem. I haven't honestly seen that play out. What I've seen is more the latter, where it is, Teachers who, as we, I loved your line about the cavalry isn't coming. Teachers who have felt, and who've been, not felt, been under supported, under coached, who've been asked to learn, who've been given 8 hours or 16 hours of training on a new curriculum, and then, which is basically a new language, and then sent off into the world to, hey, good luck. I hope that goes well. Then getting very frustrated by what feels like misaligned and random feedback that's on things that you never actually even really taught me. And so that's where we see the autonomy conversation playing out. And it speaks to, I like Dr. Brumley's points earlier about, the more time and energy invested in leaders and leadership. We coach people for a living. I coach our coaches, and we coach school leaders to be actual experts, right? If Serena Williams was going to teach me how to hit a tennis ball, my attention would be entirely on her. I'd listen to every single thing she said. I'd do exactly what she told me. Now, if some random person showed up every 4 months and sent me an email after watching me play tennis with some recommendations, I might care significantly less. And I might say, hey, I need more autonomy. And that's the way we see the autonomy conversation playing out. So, it's tricky because teachers should be able to create, I created all my own curriculum when I was a teacher. I know that that's not sustainable for most folks, but I think it's great for teachers to be doing new and cool and innovative things. But that's not usually how the autonomy conversation plays out.
There's a reason I became a curriculum advocate after leaving the classroom, and it's because I too created most of my curriculum. And if I'm being honest, I really would prefer to not have done so. It sort of made me militant on the topic of curriculum. And I've told the story 100 times about my staff developer in my first year in teaching saying, well, Mr. Pondiscio, you're the best person to know what every child needs. And my thinking she was making fun of me. Like, surely I'm not. And so actually, look, if I was going to take mild exception to any of these recommendations, and I'll ask, Cade and Regena here, as somebody who has spent the last decade or so, banging the drum for, coherent cumulative curriculum, if I take issue with anything in the report, it's the eliminate the mandate to read verbatim from teachers' manuals. Now, let me be clear, not that I'm a fan of scripted curriculum. I'm not, and I'm certainly not an advocate of McTeaching, so to speak. But I have long worried about teachers spending precious hours, on Google and Pinterest and Teachers Pay Teachers and whatnot, time that could be better spent studying student work, becoming an expert in my subject, giving feedback, developing relationships with students and parents. As I say all the time, nobody but the teacher can do those things. Someone else can do the curriculum. So we've got to take something off your plate. The theme of this conversation is how we make teaching too hard for mere mortals. Well, that's one of the ways, I think, this expectation that you're going to be both the expert lesson deliverer and expert lesson designer. So I'd love Cade and Regena for either or both of you to kind of talk about how you draw that line between, again, not asking somebody to be a robot, but also not letting them choose their own adventure, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, I'll start kind of at that statewide perspective, and then Regena will give a great classroom perspective as well. But look, Robert, frankly, we struggled with this recommendation a little bit at the agency level around the extent to which the aggressiveness that we wanted to use rather with this particular comment. And so if I may, I have the recommendations. I just want to read this one. So it says, eliminate the mandate to read verbatim from teaching manuals, excluding direct instruction. Practices have been erroneously adopted, which mandate teachers to follow a script provided in many curricula. Scripts contained in curricula are for guidance and planning and implementation and should not be mandated at the system or school level to be followed verbatim unless it is a component of a direct instruction model. And so what I hear, frankly, and sometimes I get pushed at the table legislatively because teachers are talking to their representatives or their state board members. Hey, we're not robots. There's some artistry in teaching, and so somewhere along the way in this H2IM movement, which we think is really important, there's this like false idea that meant you had to read word for word everything that was on every page to the students. And so teachers many times are feeling like, to use your words there, Robert, like they were a robot instead of an actual teaching professional. And so one of the ways that we've shared this message is that, one, we're not talking about direct instruction. That's off the table. Of course, that's going to be scripted. But two, there are different levels of success in terms of the teaching profession with their evaluations. And we use student outcome data as part of that evaluation process to help grow teachers. And so one of the things we've shared is, if you have a new novice teacher, it might be important that you keep them more closely aligned to that script, so to speak. If you have a teacher that's struggling, student outcome data is not really good, then sure, you want to have a more narrow focus there. But if you have a teacher that is demonstrating that ability to do their work, they are demonstrating the ability to veer away from that script, so to speak, here and there. Allow them to do that if those outcomes are positive. And so this recommendation, we've tried to be really clear. This is not anything in opposition to H2IM. This is just around the implementation of the H2IM.
Great, thank you. It occurs to me that I should have said this earlier. With 15 minutes to go, if you have questions for our panel, then you can send them in via social media or using the email link to Riley Fletcher that's on the event invitation. Let me throw out one of those questions right away for whoever wishes to answer it. How can we make teaching not just sustainable for the teachers we already have, but more appealing to talented individuals not currently in the teaching profession?
I'll go ahead and jump in on that one. I'm a mentor teacher for new teachers and for student teachers. And what Michael said earlier, I think is super important, is that we have qualified, trained people to help these new people along. Oftentimes they are just thrown into the classroom or to the wolves, and said, good luck. And it's just an impossible job to do without the proper structure to support those new teachers. And so I went and spoke at a university to student teaching candidates just a few weeks ago, and there were only 4, and that breaks my heart. We have a shortage, and hopefully these recommendations help elevate the profession and make it easier for us. But I think it begins with proper training and proper support structures for all those new teachers.
I would add too, and I agree with everything Regena said, and I'm gonna sound a little bit like or continue to sound like I'm beating up on school leaders. That's not my intention. I just want folks to be as effective as possible for their teachers and for the students that they serve. Cade shared this earlier. Teachers leave their principal, and that's actually across the workforce. People leave their bosses more than they leave a job. And so leaders would be really well served to define with impeccable clarity what matters in our school, how we operate, what it's going to feel like to work here. There are so many schools that are visionless, that don't have any sort of normed ways of operating. People, like, you cannot find a place where there's more built-in motivation than a school. There are hundreds of young people who, in some cases, thousands, who you're preparing to enter the world or enter high school or enter middle school, and that there's so much motivation there, but that gets lost so often when the assistant principal and the principal feel like they're at odds. The left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. When our vision is unclear, when expectations are inconsistent. And so really clear, I've heard principals speak who I said, like, I'm not planning on going back into the classroom, but I would work for that person. I would work there. And that's just, it's a rarity in our field. It really is.
Yeah, I got to say, I'm a late in life convert as a habitual curriculum and instruction guy. It took me quite a while to understand the role of school culture, and now I've come around to the idea that culture eats curriculum and instruction for breakfast. I still love curriculum instruction. Don't get me wrong, but you show me a good culture, and I'll show you good outcomes. Here's a question from one of our viewers that I just love this question. I'm embarrassed I didn't think to ask it myself. One of the recommendations is to tailor professional growth plans. When I was teaching, we had tedious growth plans that were basically just box checking exercises. How do you design professional growth plans that don't feel the same as they do now?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in there. The first thing, and by the way, that person's right, and I'm sorry that they experienced that. When schools or districts or entire school systems are clear on instructional success and what their instructional vision is, it is much easier to bucket folks in, hey, these are our folks who are need support around whether it's higher order questioning or writing measurable objectives. Here are our folks who are going to work on entry routines and who are going to work on more of the classroom culture type things. The problem is that so many schools and school systems are using, and I put using in air quotes for the folks who are just listening to us, unusable, non-digestible, like overly verbose frameworks that school leaders themselves haven't even fully internalized, let alone mastered. And so it becomes really hard to say, well, Robert's here in his development, Regena's here, Michael's here, and Cade's here, when we're not even clear as a team or as an entire district on what really good teaching looks like, which is why you get in so many places, everybody's just going to get the same thing. And by the way, it might not even be something that we even need, but we're just all going to do this because somebody, my boss's boss, told us that we're doing it.
Robert, I just want to respond to a question that you asked a couple back, and that is, the most robust recruiters for the profession should be the teachers. And I think historically that was the case. Unfortunately, when we look at numbers that are coming into the profession, sure, we'd like that pool to be greater. But if we don't take time and pay attention to recommendations like these and others, I don't think we get the professionals in the profession to be the robust recruiters for the profession that we need. And so I really think it's one and the same, unless we work to correct the conditions that are prompting practicing professionals to say, let me get online this evening and look at jobs outside of this field. If we don't stop that, we're not going to be able to get the most and maximize the recruitment efforts of the teachers in the school.
Here's a question that I'm almost afraid to know the answer to, Cade, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Are there other education leaders who are contacting you about emulating these recommendations in their state?
No, we haven't really had conversations with leaders across state lines on the recommendations. We've really just been focused on trying to get these right, communication, implementation. So we've had our plate full to get this right, but no, we haven't really had any extensive conversations with other states around these particular recommendations.
No, let me ask the same question a different way. It would surprise and sadden me if some of your peers among state leaders in the other 49 states and didn't reach out to say, hey, Cade, we read this report. This sounds fantastic. Tell us how you did it.
Yeah. And look, Robert, we certainly welcome that. And if another state would like to engage us on this work, we're happy to share. We certainly have lessons that we've learned through this process. We had, again, like 30 educators as a part of this group that all offered significant contributions to this. And so I don't want to speak for Regena, but I'll speak for myself in saying I learned a lot through the process. And so we have plenty to share with others across the country.
Perfect. Here's a question that comes in from a teacher. Many of the recommendations that the panel has discussed today seem to require a deep understanding of the psychology of human behavior and appreciation of why people, including students, do what they do and how educators can influence that behavior for the better. How important is it for teachers and school leaders to be experts in this area?
I can speak to that one. Right now we are expected to educate and be a mental health specialist. And while that is part of what is called, the hidden curriculum, we're teaching the whole child. But there becomes a point to where I am not equipped to handle the needs of certain issues that children may have. I'm not equipped with the training. I'm not equipped with the time, and so often our counselors at our schools are burdened down with other tasks that they also do not have the opportunity to service the needs of our students. And so, yes, it is part of our job still to understand the pulse of your children. Understand, okay, this child needs a hug today. This one needs me to talk to them very quickly about, you showed up at school this morning first thing and you have tears streaming down your face. Yes, come talk to me. But there comes a point where the needs of the child is so great that we need to send them to a professional because they deserve all of that.
Yep. Another question, I assume, from a teacher. Lots of teachers are going to feel hemmed in by the requirement that they use pre-made lesson plans. But as you all note, teachers who find alternative lesson plans online don't always do a good job of picking high quality materials. How do you thread that needle? Is it about educating teachers on HQIM? And for those who don't know, HQIM is high quality instructional materials.
Right. I want to take that. So, one of the things that we look for when we consider curricular resources and thinking about is this resource HQIM, high quality, we are looking for, does that resource have lesson plans embedded for the teachers? Because we believe that's an important concept for that resource. And so our idea here is not that teachers go and look for things, explore things online. That's the exact opposite of what we're hoping happens here. We're hoping that they are deeply tied and married to the HQIM so that they're interacting with that curriculum in such a way that they know it deeply and they understand it deeply and they know how to apply those concepts and that resource for students. And so what we would hope would be that the teachers would simply engage in that curriculum, annotate the plans that already exist to make them fit the needs of their students in their classroom. What we don't want to see are teachers out there on some bureaucratic long form checking boxes and having to select new adjectives and adverbs to describe the same old things over and over again that just doesn't work and frustrates them. So we're trying to refine the process.
Great. We are almost at time, but I want to give one more question from our audience. And Cade, this is directed at you. What were your successful strategies for influencing state legislation in support of your local school policy objectives?
For one, utilizing and expanding teacher voice. When we were able to reach out and connect with teachers from across the state and engage them in this work, then they were able to have conversations with their local boards, their representatives on our state board, their legislators, and having their voice amplified at the Capitol, so to speak, really mattered in moving legislation or state policy.
Terrific. We are just about out of time, but I just want to compliment you, Cade, and Regena for this work. For a long time, I have been the guy who sort of has one foot in the world of practice and one foot in the world of policy, and almost like trying to negotiate between the two. I say to teachers all the time, like, look, it would be lovely if you could just say, just trust me and send more money, but we do our work in a public policy environment at the taxpayer expense, so attention must be paid. And I find myself saying to policy people, this is not going to land in classrooms the way you think it's going to. Let's talk about what teaching looks like without being the guy who, as I like to say, waves the bloody shirt. So I'm just excited for this work and to see smart people really trying to bridge those gaps sensibly and as you say, Cade, bring teacher voice in a responsible way to this conversation. Gee, thank you. This has been a terrific hour. Michael Sonbert, Regena Beard, and Dr. Cade Brumley, I really thank you for your time and for this excellent work. And to our audience, I appreciate you making time for us, and we will see you again next month. Thank you.